Welcome to the Redeemed Vision podcast, where we bring sight to the blind and freedom to those enslaved by our pornified culture. Here, we dive into hard but important topics, such as pornography, sexual identity, true freedom, real love, and living marriage well. Go deep with us as we uncover what redeemed vision means for each of us living in the world today. Come to know yourself, the power of redemption through Jesus Christ, the joy of laughter, and how to live in gratitude and wonder. This is Redeemed Vision.
Howdy. Welcome to another edition of the Redeemed Vision podcast. I'm your host, Steve Pokorny. It is an honor to have you here with me. I'm very, very excited about this edition. Just get ready and buckle your seatbelts. Something very special is coming. But before we get into that, I want to pay some of our bills. First off is Voyage Comics, is one of our sponsors for this. A lot of Christian media is pretty subpar. You won't find that with Voyage Comics. This is it has amazing stories. They are rooted firmly in the Catholic faith. Anyone of any age can pick this up and enjoy them. And so I encourage you to click the link below to discover a world of amazing stories, and that'll support the mission of the Redeemed Vision podcast. Do you have a will? Well, if you don't, you need to click on the other link for My Catholic Will. This is going to help you to provide a legacy of faith for those you love most. This takes about 15 minutes, and you can set your loved ones up for life after you move on to the afterlife. And guess what? It's free. We have paid the bills on this. You just need to sign up there at mycatholicwill.com/freedom coaching. And mentioning freedom coaching, the Redeemed Vision podcast is a product of that, of freedom coaching being the one-to-one mentoring system designed to break the attraction to pornography and unchaste behavior in both men and women through a transformation of mind, heart, and vision. So don't just quit, be transformed. Break the power of porn. You can visit freedom-coaching.net and be set free today. And also the Freedom Coaching Foundation Incorporated, right? If God has put on your heart to support this mission financially, we encourage you to make your donation, because this any of those donations goes towards scholarships for clients who can't afford to help our coaches take care of their families, but also to be able to provide for other outreaches such as the Redeemed Vision podcast. So if you would, click on the link below and you can help support this very worthwhile endeavor and a whole lot of other work that we're doing. Please click the bell, whatever you got to do, subscribe, share this podcast with others who are in great need of hearing this life-changing message. Now on to today's work. And it can be said that the world's on fire. There's a lot of problems going on in the world, domestic and foreign. And at the heart of this are the vulnerable. These are the innocents. These are those who are being taken advantage of in many, many ways. And it seems like they have no hope. And I want to say to you, there is much hope, but there's much work to be done. And so to introduce to you a way to attain this hope for those who seem to be trapped in a hopeless situation is a person that I have great respect for, and this is Jason Jones. He's a film producer, he's an author, an activist, he's a popular podcast host, and a human rights worker. He's the president of the Human Rights Education and Relief Organization, that's HERO for short, and it's known for its two main programs, the Vulnerable People Project and Movie to Movement. He was the executive producer of Bella, associate producer of The Stoning of Soraya M., producer of award-winning pro-life short film called Crescendo with Eduardo Verastegui, also found in The Sound of Freedom, and also Patty Mellett was in there, who is the mother of Justin Bieber. I never knew that till reading this right now. Jason, he launched the Vulnerable People Project's Hope for Afghanistan's program after receiving a request to rescue a friend's mother trapped in Afghanistan during the U.S. military withdrawal. And at the heart of everything Jason does is a mission to stand between the violent and vulnerable, from the child in the womb to Christians in Nigeria, to civilians in Ukraine, to former allies in Afghanistan. His tireless work in the pro-life movement has been recognized in A Legacy of Life, a book honoring 50 of the greatest pro-life leaders in the last 50 years. He's also a senior contributor to The Stream. He's the host of the Jason Jones podcast and show. He's also the author of 3 books: The Race to Save Our Century, The World is on Fire, and The Great Campaign. And I needed to check myself because right before we came on air, Jason said he's got a 4th book coming, and he's going to talk all about that here. And his latest film, Divided Hearts of America, can now be seen on Amazon Prime. And most importantly, Jason is a husband and father, and he lives right here in the great nation of Texas. Without further ado, Jason Jones, welcome to the Redeemed Vision podcast.
The great nation of Texas. I love it.
Amen. Amen, baby. You're here. You escaped California. I came from Ohio. I like to say, like, I wasn't born here, but I got here as fast as I could. It sounds like that was your journey a little bit.
Yeah, no, it's great to be in Texas. Hawaii is really where I lived most of my life, and we fled during COVID. We looked over the whole world. You know, the nature of my work, we work a lot in the Middle East and Asia and Africa. We had an office in Rome at the time. And I said, let's just look, where do we want to live? The world is very strange right now. Where do I want to put my family? And, it came down to Iceland or German hill country of Texas. And there was a Buc-ee's here, and they didn't have any Buc-ee's in Iceland at the time.
No, they don't.
So we picked Texas.
If any of you don't know what Buc-ee's is, you're missing out. I do recommend the Babylon Bees, Californians Move to Texas, and the episode about Buc-ee's. So, Jason, was that your experience with Buc-ee's?
I'll tell you my first experience with Buc-ee's. Yeah. I was driving from Austin to San Antonio for a speech about 7 years ago before we moved here. Mm-hmm. And I had some friends from Texas who said, you have to go to Buc-ee's. I'm like, a gas station? Like a truck stop? Like, what are you talking about? And my first experience with Buc-ee's is I go in there and they have a pyramid, like the size of the Pyramid of Giza. It's huge. It was made up of buckets of bacon grease. And I knew that I was in the most wonderful place in the world. Then you go in and then it's like Walmart, but the only thing they have are knickknacks and trinkets, like gifts. And, they have the world's largest selection of beef jerky and candy. And and I must say, I don't, it's probably inappropriate, but even if you don't have to go to the bathroom,
go to the bathroom.
Yes. Yes. And you can eat. You could actually get your food and eat it on the floor of their bathroom. It's that clean. This is Buc-ee's is great. I say to my staff, I want to be depending. Sometimes I say I want VPP to be to human rights work what the Trump Hotel is to hospitality, or to what Buc-ee's. Like, I look to Buc-ee's and the Trump hotels as sort of how I want the staff at VPP to treat the vulnerable communities we serve. I hope that it's exciting for them is going to Buc-ee's or going to the Trump Hotel.
Amazing. We like to say Buc-ee's is way more than a glorified gas station. The floor could literally be the next place you eat your meal. So we did not plan this, folks. You never know what you're going to experience on the Redeemed Vision podcast. Here we go. So Jason, I shot you a quick text. I don't know if you got it. I don't know if you checked it, but I warned you to bring with you a dad joke. I know that you're a father. Do you have one warmed up that you can pull out of the background there?
I don't have a dad joke, but I can tell you a true story.
Bring it. Yes.
A little story. A moth one day walked into a podiatrist's office, and the podiatrist welcomed the moth, into his office. And he said, how can I help you? How is everything? And the moth said, how is everything? It's horrible. My boss, Mr. Malikovic, he abuses me. I don't even know what I do there. I don't even know if my boss, Mr. Malikovic, knows what I'm doing there. All he does is abuse me all day. But as bad as things are at work, I dread going home. And the doctor was like, well, that sounds horrible. Why do you dread going home? He's like, my marriage is loveless. My wife hates me. Mm-hmm. I just, as soon as I walk through the door, like doom and gloom set over me. My own children despise me, and I'm just, I'm very depressed, and I don't even see any meaning in living anymore. And the podiatrist looks at the moth, and he's like, well, I mean, it seems to me you need a psychiatrist, not a foot doctor. Why did you come to my office? And he said, well, the light was on, and the door was open.
Okay, that is brilliant. That is brilliant. I have never heard that. I'm going to use that. That's great, Jason. I don't know if you knew this about me, but when I was younger, I played a lot of rock, paper, and scissors, and I made a lot of money doing it. So you can basically say that I made a lot of money over fist over money on this, right? So
there you have it, dad jokes.
There you go, dad jokes. All right. So anyway, with that said, Jason, I met you first time I met you in person. Again, being aware of a lot of the work that you're doing for many, many years. And we'll get into some of that work there. But more immediately, you were at a retreat. You were speaking there. I'm getting to hear from you, and then your plans announced were this summer. First, going over to, I think if I have, you can fill in the details. Going first to Gaza, then to Ukraine, then I think the Congo, and then I think the Philippines. And I'm looking at this and I'm hearing this. I'm like, have I done anything? Am I going to do anything this summer, or have I done anything with my life before? So, Jason, like, incredible. So, what is it like? What was your summer like going through all that?
Well, first of all, Steve, to your point, one of the things that embarrasses me about the nature of my apostolate is, I would say, it's very thin. What I do is thin, and we partner with people that do very deep work. And what do I mean by that? So, I founded the Vulnerable People Project, Hero, in 2002. With the mission of harnessing the pro-life movement in the United States to defend the vulnerable around the world facing genocide or democide. And as strange as this is going to sound, in college, we can get into why, but pro-life is the foundation of my human rights work, and I think it's the most important work on earth. But I also had an interest in, and I wanted to really stand with fathers to help them defend their families from violence around the world. And I realized after the Army, I went into the Army right after high school. And then I went to university. And I knew as a young soldier, as an infantryman, I wanted to found a human rights organization. At the time, I was an atheist, but pro-life. So I wanted to found an organization that was not faith-based, that was pro-life, but from the child in the womb to the child in Darfur. That was sort of, that was my vision. But I looked at other human rights organizations as models or to potentially work for after I graduated. And I noticed that the largest organizations abandon those communities that are most in need. And the reason why is because there wasn't a base of power or financial support for those communities. And I really realized that the pro-life movement is the only human rights movement in the world where people without skin in the game invest their whole life into standing with the vulnerable child in the womb. So I thought, well, I can wake up the pro-life movement to standing with the Yazidi, for example, in Iraq, or Christians in Nigeria. So that was the vision. And I knew that those people who were courageously anti-abortion, that courageously stood with the child in the womb, would be the foundation of any authentic human rights movement that stood with communities outside of the sphere of social concern.
Amazing. Thank you for what you're doing. I assume on some
and
level.
I wanted to get to my point about the thin suit. And so a lot of times people say, like, oh, I just saw that you were in Egypt and Gaza and here and there, and what am I doing? Well, what we do at VPP, we couldn't do without specifically usually Catholics on the ground, whether they're Catholics in India or Catholics in Congo or Catholics in Nigeria or Malawi or the Philippines. So those communities that live there that do, for example, us bringing food into Gaza, well, the folks who are really courageous are the Palestinian Christians and the Lebanese and the Jordanians and the others who are the aid workers who are there day in and day out, loading trucks, unloading trucks. I might show up to do some documentary work or to set up the logistics. And then I'm in and out.
Mm.
But it's people like you that do the deep and hard work of your apostolate, that I partner with in our work, where we really try to knit together the influence and the wealth of the church in the West to serve the vulnerable communities. But at the end of the day, to be honest, the work that I do and our American team members, it's really, I say it's thin soup. The really challenging work is done with our partners in country, and we don't bring folks. We don't need to bring people to the places we serve. There are enough really intelligent, hardworking people in the countries we serve to knit together our teams.
And as I was saying, thank you for the work you're doing. But I would also just gently push back and saying, because we're the body of Christ. The ear doesn't say to the eye, "I don't need you," right? So whether we're on the ground in doing the packing the trucks, for instance, or if we're providing logistics right here in the States for the travel there, all of that's necessary. And I think the question comes down to, what is my calling? How's God calling me to use the gifts that I have here? So, but again, I say thank you to that. And I want to dig into the man who is Jason Jones a little bit, right? Because you're a fascinating person, and then the little that I know of you, I want to get to know you better, and especially for our audience here on the Redeemed Vision podcast. So I want to go back here, if you'll permit. What was your family like that would help form that you would say how has helped form you and the man that you are today?
Well, my family, I come from a family of very interesting people. And although I was raised with no faith, the most religious person in my childhood was my mother's father, my mother's father. And he just recently passed away in his late 90s, was a very committed Scientologist.
Interesting.
And extremely anti-Catholic.
Okay.
He could be a very charming man, but he was also a very brutal man. And I don't begrudge him. It's very easy to understand how my grandfather became such a violent man. My first memory is of my grandfather beating up my grandmother. I must have been about 2. And my grandmother came falling through our apartment door. We were neighbors, and I ran to grab the phone. And my grandfather was very violent. But he had no teeth by the time he was 17. His mother, my great grandmother, who I knew, and she died when I was in my late teens. She was born in the late 19th century, was an immigrant from Germany. She probably had a very hard life as well, but she was married 7 times. So you can imagine my grandfather growing up in the 20s and 30s, and he had no teeth left by the time he was 17 because my great grandmother's various violent husbands would just beat my grandfather. And my mother had me when she was 16, and she actually married my father, but the marriage didn't last 6 months. So I have no memory of my mother and father. I think once in my life, or maybe twice in my life, I was in the same room with both of them that I can remember. I think once was a 3rd grade at a play, and once they both showed up to the same football game in high school. So, and I grew up with a lot of stepbrothers and stepsisters, half brothers and half sisters. And where my family was they're very creative. They're very self-taught, but reading. I'm a high school dropout, but I was raised around books and raised always reading. And my mother, as wild of a woman as she was, and she was married many times and divorced many times. And so my childhood was wild. But I will say, and she never had money, but I always had encyclopedia sets and different types of encyclopedia sets. There'd be the Children's Encyclopedia, the World Encyclopedia, the Children's Encyclopedia on Science, the Children's Encyclopedia on Biology. And so I was always reading, and I was curious to be creative. And we're also a very athletic and competitive family. So I had sports as an outlet. But really, I think the root of sort of what primed me for the work that I do was, as a young man, seeing violence in the household, to my grandmother, who was the love of my life. She's my best friend. We were very close. My mother had me when she was a teenager, and my grandmother had my mother when she was very young. So my grandmother and I were tied at the hip until she died when I was in sixth grade. So as a young man, I became very aggressive and very violent, but a protector. I was the anti-bully. If I saw kids throwing rocks at ducks at the pond, I would throw their bikes into the pond,
Okay.
So I was just always sort of on a mission to stand up to bullies. But also maybe I wanted to be the strongest, the fastest. I was always into boxing and wrestling and martial arts as a little kid, always competitive. And so I guess I don't ever remember feeling fear, but I remember wanting to face violence head on. And then the event that we can maybe talk to that led to me joining the Army when I was 17. And I joined the Army the week of my 17th birthday. And was just about 8 weeks later, I found myself in Fort Benning, Georgia.
Was that legal? Like didn't you have to be 18 to get in the Army?
No. America is one of the few countries left that to this day, I just took my son to the recruiter yesterday, where you do not have to be 18 to join the military. At the time, even now, because right now you don't even need a high school diploma because numbers are so low to join the infantry. At the time I joined the infantry, I had to get a GED. So I'm from Chicago area, and they didn't think I would pass the Illinois GED. So the recruiters said, just take it in Georgia. So I was processed at the reception center in Georgia.
Interesting.
And even though I'm from Illinois, and took the Georgia GED, passed. It's not every day you meet someone with a Georgia GED.
I know. Here we are.
And so no, I joined as a 17-year-old.
So what you're saying, Jason, even if you don't get your high school diploma, you can still do awesome things too. So I think that is what a gift. And just 3 comments that I have based on what you just shared. You are the founder of the Vulnerable People Project. You come from the Interesting People Project, basically.
Yeah.
And it's where you experience a lot of violence. You are around violence going on, right? You try to use violence as for good, I would say, to a degree. But there's something to be said for the idea: hurt people hurt others, right? And so these wounds, we can either use them to fester in us to do a lot of damage, or we can allow them to expose them to get healing there so that we can help heal others, right? And then the third comment would be, I think the 3 characteristics, perhaps, and you can disagree with me because it's your life, that best describe you growing up, but I think it's moved into your professional and personal life growing up or now, is that you've been curious and creative and competitive, right? So I think those are 3 great C activities. So even if you only got C's in high school, shall we say, your
You
C's
wish.
are doing well in life.
You wish, Steve. You wish I would have gotten C's in high school. Strangely, I was just an F student. School was to be eligible for football. I could be a straight A student until eligibility didn't matter, and then I would just stop coming to school. I would say after the Army, I went to the university, and in college, it was easy for me to maintain A's. I just think sort of the public school system and maybe the chaos in my childhood life, just made formal education almost impossible for me as a kid to focus in the classroom. But once I got out of the house and joined the Army and was an adult going to college after the Army, I loved school, but I was always curious, always reading. Yeah, I would ditch school to go to museums and bookstores. And I was a notorious book thief. I would steal books all day long. I bought those books. I don't want you guys to
Okay, that's good. We have to call anybody.
I stopped stealing books when I was around 11 or 12 years old. But I was the original.
Well, let's go there, Jason. So what was it about books that kind of did it for you? Because I know growing up myself, like, I watched a lot of TV and movies, and maybe that's my problem. Maybe that's why I'm in my seat and you're in your seat. But reading became a challenge. I'm a reader now, but what did books do for you?
I daydreamed a lot. I'm a daydreamer, and I think books were fuel for daydreams. And I would get into these wild enthusiasms. You know, I remember when I first heard reggae music. Imagine I'm like 11 years old, blonde hair and blue eyes, and I first heard a Bob Marley song. And who is this? What's this guy? Next thing you know, I'm reading every book I can on Rastafarianism. Or
Wow.
I was into martial arts. I did judo and karate. And next thing you know, I'm in 7th grade, barely keeping C's. And I'm walking around with like D.T. Suzuki books on Zen Buddhism. And I saw the Oliver North hearings when I was in 8th grade. And next thing you know, I'm not only reading books on Nicaragua and reading Karl Marx and communism, I'm also reading Soldier of Fortune magazine, you know, because I want to go and I want to fight the communists. And it's a true story. Like, I haven't talked to this guy in 30 years, but I went to high school with a guy named Nick Floyd, and his dad was a very successful surgeon, and he came from money. And Nick now is one of the 3 Floyds and 3 Floyds beer, which is the #1 ranked beer in the United States, I think.
Really?
Yeah. And I was trying to convince Nick to steal money from his parents so we could buy plane tickets to go to Nicaragua to join the Contras, you know, and I'm like, we're 14 years old, and I was serious. So I was a strange kid. I daydreamed a lot. My grandmother loved Louis L'Amour. And so when she passed away, I threw myself into Louis L'Amour. I read Eiji Yoshikawa's Musashi, and then I would read every book I could on samurai and Ronin, and I'm reading cowboy books. And so no, for me, it was just daydreaming about who I wanted to be and kind of man I would want to be. And I read in 8th grade, I read Anthem by Ayn Rand and Harrison Bergeron by Kurt Vonnegut. No, they were actually assigned. And, you know, these teachers would probably be just baffled if they heard me talking about a book they assigned in 1984, because in 1984, when I was in their class, I think they didn't even realize I was the first kid in class to finish the book, even if I didn't turn in any assignments or show up for most of the classes. So, but those 2 books really impacted me. And then I threw myself into the writings of Ayn Rand, which would come back around, and I became sort of a militant atheist as a young soldier, and through my mid to late 20s. Yeah, so no, books for me was just, as they still are. You know, with the work I do, it can be awful lonely, and one of the people that I identify with is Hannah Arendt, the Jewish political philosopher, German Jewish political thinker, and I've just been reading her letters to all of her friends. And I take comfort in knowing that this woman who is Jewish and who barely escaped the Gestapo and was a brilliant political philosopher, then became a critic of Zionism, and she lost a lot of her friends. So as I have been speaking out against Israel's war crimes in Gaza, especially to the first century Christian church, that they're hammering and bombing and sniping our Christians. I have a lot of my friends are expressing their frustration at how loudly and clearly I'm expressing my dissent. And so to go and read Hannah Arendt's letters, it's as if I have someone I can talk to. And for her, it was much more personal and much more painful. And so no, books for me are my friends. And I mean, I'm looking at all of them now, and I work with the Uyghur. I'm reading a book on Uyghur poetry. You know, I don't know how everyone in the world. We just did a Hemingway movie, so I'm also throwing myself into Hemingway's writings, which has been really helpful for me, because I've really come to understand Ernest Hemingway was someone who grappled with PTSD from his time as an ambulance driver in World War I. So no, when you're surrounded by books, like, you're just surrounded by multiple universes, you know, multiple lives. I love letters. I love reading the books of letters. I love Japanese death poetry. So I get into it. I have a lot of strange tastes, but I'm always have had a book in my hand since I was probably 6 to this day. You probably won't see me anywhere without a book in my hand.
I love it, Jason. And again, I think a lot can be said for, you can know a lot about a person about the books they read, right? And then we can flip it around. May your life, in general, and I say this to all those who are hearing this, may your life also be a book that people can read. if we can take that perspective. And I've always said now, especially I say this to my daughters, whenever you go anywhere, always bring a book. You'll never be bored. Always, right? Opens your world up. And I'm gonna definitely have to go back and re-listen to this episode, because you threw out a ton of titles, things I have not read or experienced, and I'm looking forward to adding to my list. So thank you for that. Now I want to push here, Jason, because moving ahead, you grew up a staunch atheist. That's what to your self-proclaimed words. And then somewhere along the lines, you encountered this guy by the name of Jesus.
Yeah.
Talk to me about that.
Yeah, well, for me, I didn't start out as staunch atheist. In fact, I remember for my 16th birthday, I had begged someone in my family to buy me a Bible, and I would read that Bible. And I don't know why, maybe just because I didn't get past Matthew. I kept rereading Matthew over and over and over again. And now the epistles, I love the epistles because I feel like they're talking to me a lot of the times. And not because I'm a good guy. I'm like, hey, how did you know what I'd be like? But I kept reading Matthew, and then eventually I met a homeless. I used to sneak to my high school girlfriend's house a couple miles away. I would walk there, and she was from a very wealthy family. She would give me money, and she'd say, "Why don't you go call a cab from the gas station like a mile away?" And I had to walk through this forest preserve. You know, I'm 16 years old, 17. I'm 15, 16 years old. I'd walk through this forest preserve, and it was a little scary. But one night she would give me money, but I would use it for lunch money and didn't want to tell her because I was embarrassed. And I would just hitchhike home. And one night this homeless lady picked me up. And so I gave her my Bible before I could get past Matthew, which I'd read like 3 times. So that was probably, I had it for 3 or 4 months. And so that was sort of my first kind of, I don't even know why I was just so mesmerized by it. But I was, because, you know, even now I think Matthew is, I love John. Like John really engages me, but I was just mesmerized. But then
what mesmerized you?
I don't even remember. I just remember I was like, I should go on I should go on to Mark or whatever. But I was like, let me reread Matthew. And so I'd read it for like 4 months, and then I got rid of the Bible, and just kind of life moved along, and that was that. And it was the Living Translation. There was a commercial for it. It was Pat Robertson's The Living Translation. I saw the commercial, I think, and I asked for that translation, you know. And but then a couple of months later, my high school girlfriend told me she was pregnant, and this was a few days before my 17th birthday. So we conspired that I would join the Army. At this time, I would not have said I was an atheist. I probably would have said I was a Christian, not knowing what that even means. But I joined the Army on my 17th birthday. My high school girlfriend was to hide the pregnancy. Her father, a very prominent Catholic man, to me, I really looked up to him. He was wealthy. They had a big extended family, seemed very ordered, not ordered at all, but seemed very ordered. And we were going to tell him that she was pregnant when I got back from basic training. While I was in basic, he found out, because when she entered the 3rd trimester, just a couple of weeks before I was to come home, she was still hiding the pregnancy, like 90-pound, 5'2" Irish girl. But she was still hiding the pregnancy. She asked her friend's mother, who was a doctor. Her father was also a doctor. She asked her friend's mother for a prescription for prenatal vitamins, thinking that this far along, what she was taking from Walgreens wasn't good enough. The mom gave her the prescription, but then called the dad. The dad found out, beat her up, took her to Chicago Masonic Hospital for a forced 3rd trimester abortion. And just so you know, her father was best friends with Cardinal Bernardine. You know, I didn't know what that meant at the time. I just knew that her dad was best friends with this prominent cardinal that I always see on WGN News. And he's this big public Christian. And that's when I became a militant atheist. My militant atheism was birthed at the same moment my commitment to defending the child in the womb was birthed. Strange as that sounds.
If I can just interject here, Jason.
Yeah.
And for those who are especially hearing this hurts, right, a lot. And again, a lot of pieces now of who Jason Jones are coming into focus here. And there's an old DC Talk song called "What If I Stumble?" At the very beginning of that song, paraphrasing, the greatest single cause of atheism in the world are Christians who go to church on Sunday and then live their life as if God doesn't exist, right? And you got hit with that, which is like your child has just been murdered, and then like the ones who are in charge of that are those who are representing Jesus. Why would I want to be a part of any of that, right? So I can see this burning intensity on both of those. So moving, and so obviously the love for the unborn clearly comes from that, because this is very personal for you. I get that. When does Jesus begin to work on your heart and begin to shift things that maybe that was not the best example of who he is in his church?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I went back to Ayn Rand, and I went and started reading all of her nonfiction, like Capitalism, The Unknown Ideal, The Virtue of Selfishness. And I discovered that Ayn Rand was very pro-abortion, radical individual autonomy, right? So I forgave her for that in a way I wouldn't have forgiven the Christians, which is interesting. I'm like, well, she just didn't understand basic biology at the time. If she understood, so I kind of pulled Ayn Rand's objectivism, the radical defense of the individual from the collective. I pulled it from birth to back to fertilization, and didn't really pay Christianity much mind. I was very active, founded the Pro-Life Student Union at the University of Hawaii, also founded the Ayn Rand Society at the University of Hawaii, became chairman of the Young Republicans and chairman of the College Republicans. I would use the Bible in a way if I would try to manipulate Christians into speaking out against abortion, or I would go speak to the InterVarsity Club. I remember going to the Newman Center, and the priest, kind of an effeminate, overweight guy, shooing me away and calling me a judgmental extremist, and got the same treatment from the InterVarsity Club. Well, my clubs were bigger than theirs. Wasn't really interested. I did think that being a Christian would be good for my public life. So I wrote, when I was 19, still in the Army, a 40-year plan to end abortion. And I thought I should fake a conversion to Christianity in my late 20s. And so I put in this 40-year plan, I would become a Christian and I would become Episcopalian, because I studied like which denomination has made the most presidents and governors. I'll become that.
Wow.
So I put in my plan, I'll become an Episcopalian Scottish Rite Freemason, So that's in my plan. And so somewhere along the line, I'm like, I need to start studying this Christianity stuff so I can do a better job of manipulating these Christians to fighting abortion. And but I couldn't bring myself to it. I'm like, I'm going to make a study of the Bible so I can manipulate Christians. I just couldn't bring myself to doing it. At the time, I was chief of staff for a state representative who was Jewish and Republican, pro-life, good guy. They would always ask him to give the sermons. Like whenever the Republican Party in Hawaii needed someone to give a prayer, they would always ask Mark, Representative Moses. Mark would always ask me to write the prayer. So he had a secular Jewish guy asking an atheist guy to write a prayer for, and
this is perfect. I love this. I love it.
So, I would write these prayers, but there was a woman named Jan Judd, and she had been married to a very powerful man in Hawaii who was state senator, who introduced the first bill to legalize abortion. Jan actually spent her whole life trying to undo what her husband did. And she would come around, and she was a socialite from a wealthy East Coast family who married into this prominent Hawaiian family, Hawaiian family, one of the most prominent. And now in the 90s, she was this just 90-year-old woman walking around here. She talked like she drank too much whiskey and smoked cigarettes. And she said, Jason, you need to go to church. And I know, Jan. She's like, I don't want to bring you to my church. They don't even love Jesus there. She was Episcopalian. She's like, I want to bring you to Calvary Chapel. So she brought me to Calvary Chapel. And I went, and I loved it. And started reading the Bible again, and started listening to J. Vernon McGee. This is J. Vernon McGee. Get on the Bible bus. And I would go out and I'd get drunk in Waikiki. I'm living in Waikiki. I'd come home just sauced out of my mind, 26 years old, whatever. And I would get into my bed and I would put on evangelical Christian radio, K-Light, and I would listen to J. Vernon McGee, the Bible bus, and I loved it. And I ordered his books. But then I discovered Francis Schaeffer. This was amazing to me. I was at a book sale in front of someone's house, like a yard sale. and I bought this old Francis Schaeffer book called The Christian Manifesto. I was writing a book called Generation X Manifesto. It was sort of like an atheist libertarian, it became the race to save our century because I was becoming Christian as writing it. And I realized this is going to become a different book, but it's the book that became the race to save our century. My first book I wrote with John Smirek. I was actually already working on it in the mid 90s as an atheist. And, but I read this book by Francis Schaeffer. Then really pulled me in and started going to this evangelical church. They wanted me to become a pastor right away. They were like, you're on fire. But my moral life was completely unchanged. Like what I was doing before, I was doing after. Didn't even feel guilty about it. Didn't even feel shame. I was that man who could not even blush that C.S. Lewis talked about. And I remember thinking, Lord, just God, please give me the ability to feel shame at my behavior, which I didn't even feel. So I knew I was a walking catastrophe. But I was falling in love with God. I remember I started, I should have said this earlier. I started reading the Bible when I started going to Calvary Chapel. I started in Genesis, more or less read straight through. But it was really when I hit the New Testament, this time, not like a 16-year-old reading it for some sort of vague feeling of touching the numinous or whatever I was feeling as a 16-year-old, but now in a more thoughtful and engaged way. I remember what I was thinking. This isn't who Jesus Christ has been presented to me as. This isn't Christianity. I remember reading Paul saying when they told Paul not to judge, when Paul was telling them that not to go before the ungodly to judge, but to judge amongst themselves. He said, don't you know you will judge the angels in the world? How much more should you judge the matters of this world? When I was an atheist and people would tell me you shouldn't judge, I would always get Christians on campus telling me I shouldn't judge in relation to my anti-abortion activism. And my response would be, who said that? They would say, Jesus said that. I'm like, Jesus told us not to judge? He should have read Aristotle, because then he would know that he's committing the fallacy of a stolen concept. He's judging. If you just say don't judge, you're judging. But that's not what was said. Don't judge like a hypocrite. Take the plank out of your own eye. Take the speck out of your brother. Not leave the plank in your eye. Not let your brother walking around with the speck in his eye. By the way, a speck hurts more than a plank. Think about that.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, I've never thought about that. Yeah.
Like, but you got a thing in your eye. You take it out. You don't absolve yourself of. You know what? I'm not going to help you with your speck because, I have this nice plank in my eye. I'm going to leave it here forever. It's not to be a hypocrite. It's to judge according to God's judgments, not my own inclinations or enthusiasms, my emotions, my feelings. So I just remember like falling in love with Jesus Christ and being upset. I remember I was really upset that not once in the Army did a chaplain sit down and talk to me, and I was upset that what I used to call the Christian club on campus, I'll be your friend if you be my friend, the club. I said that you guys have nothing in common, no interests in common. All you have in common is your willingness to sit around and not judge each other. That's weird. Maybe you should judge each other. I would always tease the clubs, but I felt kind of like I was upset that this false Christianity was being shared and the truth wasn't being presented to me. And around this time, and then I'll shut up, I tripped into the church fathers, Hilar Bellick and G.K. Chesterton.
Oh, it's
and
over.
You're not escaping the church fathers, Hilar Bellick and G.K. Chesterton without becoming Catholic.
Nope. And especially the fact that you have this, like, look at this, Jason, like, and we like to say here on the Redeemed Vision podcast, nothing's wasted, everything's redeemable, right? You have this ravenous love for defending the vulnerable, but also this ravenous desire of curiosity, of learning to read and explore avenues. God uses that to get you into the word, but then also, especially his true friends, right, that can write very well, explicating that and exploring different avenues through this lens of Christianity, brought you home, which is beautiful. right? And so with that, then, and so Jason is able to do amazing things without grace. Just wait what happens when he gets sacramental grace. Watch what happens. Beautiful. I love it. I love it. So I want to move the conversation forward here, because I know our time is limited, and I want to respect your time. You are a movie producer, right? And I don't know too many people who get into movie production and all the elements that go into that. How did that happen?
Yeah, again, I wrote this 40-year plan. I used to go door to door talking to people about abortion as a young soldier. And my captain called me and told me to write a plan, said knocking on doors isn't probably the best plan. He mapped it out, how you start a plan. You start with your goal and you work your way back, and you ask yourself, who can do this and who can do what needs to be done and how do they get there, and take one step back, and who can get here and how. And so I made this plan. And in my original plan, I put that I would learn how to be a public speaker. I would learn how to write, be a writer and speaker, and then I would make movies. I really just thought it'd be documentaries. But in 1999, Paul Weyrich, one of the sort of modern founders of the modern American conservative movement, wrote an open letter to the conservative movement. And in it, he said, we achieved all of our political goals, but we have not engaged the culture. We've completely lost the culture while putting Reagan in the White House twice, while controlling most of the state legislatures and most of the governor's mansions over the past 30 years. Like, what did it get us? Because we lost the culture. And that's when I was actually chief of staff for a state representative at the time, chairman of the Young Republicans, in graduate school, but preparing for law school. I wanted to go to law school. But it was in reading this that I realized, probably I didn't need to be a lawyer, that I should look more towards how to engage culture through language. And again, I thought that would be just documentaries. My first film was in 2000. I was a radio talk show host and a radio producing other shows while I had my own show, while I was chief of staff for state rep and director of Hawaii Right to Life. But I produced my first documentary in 2001, and it was just on youth culture in America. But then I met Eduardo Verástegui in 2006 in Mexico City. And that's how I tripped into the film industry proper, into real Hollywood, and to making, films like Bella and The Stoning of Soraya M. A narrative. There's a big difference between producing a documentary and a narrative film. They're worlds apart.
It's a beautiful, beautiful thing. And I think especially if we as Christians, I would say going back to that experience that you highlighted, especially in college, of seeing a bunch of the Christians in their group, but they're basically talking in their silos and they're not getting out and not expanding, right? There's something about, yes, we do have to take care of our own stuff in-house. And I think that's one of the issues that's going on in the church today. We haven't been taking care of our stuff, but then also we are called to evangelize. We're called to go out. We're called to take on a culture that is lost in many, many ways, and say, we've got good news. We have something better for you. But the problem comes in most of there are Christians who are many talented artists, but the quality in many cases of that art has been not art. I would argue it's been ugly, right? So, and one major props to the movie Bella. I have a Bella in my life. She's now 14, my Isabella. And about 4 months ago, because she heard about the movie Bella, Daddy, can we watch it? And so we sat down and watched it. That message, the movie, the quality of that still very much stands up. It's a little dated, but not much at all. And so I want to thank you in the work there. So and also, how much of that, of the production of that, would you say, with what you went through, especially of losing your own child, went into the crafting of that film?
Well, none. No, because that would be Alejandro. What was striking is it's sort of 3 stories in one that Alejandro Monteverdi, the director, rolled into a film. But I have to say, obviously, it resonated with me, right? The story when I first met Eduardo and they shared with me their vision for this film. I just offered to help. I'm like, how can I be of help? I was about to go be the national grassroots director for the Brown Bag for President campaign. I just said, you tell me how I can help. And what they needed at the time was someone to raise the money for the film and the finishing funds and the P&A funds. And that's how I became executive producer of that film. In fact, you know, I've gone on obviously to produce films, but an executive producer is someone who just really is on the business end of things, brings the money or puts together the money. And I remember the guys called me, and I was in Iowa working for Sam Brownback, and Leo Severino, the producer, said, "Jason, why are you on IMDb as our executive producer?" And I was like, "I don't even know what IMDb is. I don't know. I'm sorry." Because I was telling him not to use my name in the film because I didn't want to be in the credits. In fact, when it was theatrically released, it was J.S. Jones, because I was such a pro-life activist. And in fact, when the guys came together to make the film, it was just a story they wanted to tell. They weren't even thinking of the third rail of American politics. They wanted to tell a story of a Latino hero. They didn't realize what they were tripping into. Boy, did I knew. And I was more than happy to lead them into the battle, you know, without telling them, come on, guys, it'll be fun. Walk this way. But not so fast. Look out for landmines. But yeah, for me, it resonated, as it does with a lot of people. But again, and I want to say this, I will say the films that I've worked on, they have an artistic merit, and we win a lot of film festivals. There are a lot of other faith-based films that have done very well financially, and a lot of times people will criticize the production value. I'll say that when I make a film, it's very conscious. We just came back from Spain, where we're shooting a very expensive short film. It's on an Ernest Hemingway story, Hills Like White Elephants. It's a pro-life story. And a lot of these films that we see that are faith-based films, that are lower production values, they are well-made films. It's just a function of budget. And they have to say, like, what kind of distribution can we get? How much money can this type of film potentially make at the box office? And so it's really just a matter of good business sense. Not that they can't make big and beautiful films. You know, there are some of these companies that I'm shocked at how good the quality of filmmaking is for the budgets that they have. My partners, you know, and our investors, they know very well that we're not looking right off the bat at financial success. But, you know, that's why we make these short films through the nonprofit. The film Crescendo, which is, I think, the winningest short film in Hollywood history of any short film festivals. You know, that was a $650,000 14-minute film. And you'll see it. You'll go, my gosh, we shot at Universal Studios. It's set in Germany in the 17th century. Everything is perfect. We wanted to make a timeless work of art that exemplified the dignity of the child in the womb, that transcended culture, that people would watch for the rest of human history. We weren't looking to engage in which I have worked on films where we're trying to engage in a public relations strategy to engage culture through the earned media and paid media and through the lower budget film. These are all very noble things to do and good things to do. It's just when you look at a film, the production quality is usually a function not of the ability of the director and the producers, but just a simple business decision. What budget can this type of film sustain and still make a profit? And that's what you're going to get.
And that's what the executive producer is all concerned about. Wonderful. Jason, the movie Crescendo, where can we watch that?
You know, we put it up on YouTube. You just put Crescendo, the movie.
Oh,
it's there. It's at the Movie to Moving website. It's in German, and you'll love it. You'll love it.
Awesome. Well, guess what I'm doing after we're done? That's what I'm going to put on. So I want to, and thank you for making beautiful art. We need more of it. Keep going on that. I want to highlight this. I met you at the retreat that I went on, and you talked me into getting a copy of this. I'm so glad I did. Ate it for breakfast. This is for all those who are listening to this. Get a copy of this. Support this work. It is one of the. I mean, you are an incredible writer. All your years of reading did definitely pay off on this. And I just so we're on the same page who are hearing this, the title is called The Great Campaign Against the Great Reset. So 2 questions. What is the Great Reset? And why do we need a great campaign?
Yeah, well, thank you. Well, a better title for the book would have been "The Mystical Body of Christ Against the Mystical Body of Antichrist." And I actually purchased the greatcampaign.org before I was Catholic, like in the 90s. I've owned
Really?
it since then. Yeah. In fact, Avon wanted to offer me like 20 years ago $500,000 for it because they do this big thing called the Great Campaign. I should have sold it, but I didn't. I missed my chance. But I got it first. I first heard it from John Paul the Great, St. John Paul the Great, when he in Evangelium Vitae called us to launch a great campaign in defense of life. And so when I read the Gospel of Life as a young atheist, it really captured me. And I ever since then, I said, that's what I'm on. I'm on a great campaign. Every action, every inaction, every podcast, every article, every book, every movie, it's this campaign to defend the vulnerable from violence. And I liked it. So I've been using it now for over 30 years. And what is the Great Reset? Well, I want to read this quote, though, that comes from C.S. Lewis. I think you're going to love it. It's enemy-occupied territory. That's what this world is. Christianity is the story of how the rightful king has landed. You might say landed in disguise, and is calling us to take part in a great campaign of sabotage. So what is the great campaign? Well, it's St. John Paul the Great said, it's a great campaign to defend the vulnerable, a great campaign to share the truth about the dignity of the human person. But as C.S. Lewis called us to, I like this idea of sabotaging the Great Reset. What is fundamentally the Great Reset? It's a washing away of the very last remnants of Christendom. At the heart of what the Great Reset seeks to do is make us forget the truth about who we are and our Creator. And so the Great Campaign against the Great Reset, it's a campaign to reassert the truth about man, about God, and about man's place in the world and man's vocation in this world. And I got the idea for this book. I was actually due to write another book to Sophia Press, and they were a very kind and forgiving publisher. I had signed a contract to write a book called On Rocky Soil, the spiritual autobiography of a man you may not meet in heaven. That is my next book. But I was in no mood to write this book because I signed the contract the week Afghanistan began to fall. I thought that would be a month, and it's 3 years later, and I'm still up to my eyeballs in Afghanistan work. But the first 2 years was really traumatic, not even to get into it, but it was just very hard work, the hardest work we've done. And now up into Gaza. Gaza is just unbelievable. But I was just not in a place to write that book. And I was in Ukraine. I was in Kyiv. I was visiting a hospital. And this was last June, and over a year ago. And, in every room, this hospital was a former Soviet prison, and every room had at least 3 patients, young men with no arms, no legs, no eyes. And I realized, well, we're worrying about the Great Reset coming to us. We keep hearing this phrase, the Great Reset. We're going to eat crickets. We're going to own Klaus Schwab. You're going to own nothing and like it.
And I'm happy about it.
And I realized, the work that VPP has been doing around the world, we've been battling the Great Reset. And it's more vicious than people could even begin to understand. I mean, just put it into perspective. Wall Street Journal reported yesterday that there have been 1 million KIA or wounded in Ukraine since the war started. 1 million. In Gaza, we're at 18,000 children at least killed. Every Christian church, every church has been bombed by the IDF at least once. Every Christian school and every Christian hospital has been bombed. The refugees killed, hiding there. Silence from the world. Silence. So what inspired me to write this book was I'm deploying Catholic social teaching against the ideological enthusiasms that we call the Great Reset. The Great Reset is like a swamp of wicked ideologies. And so we address these wicked ideologies. transhumanism, anti-humanism, Gnosticism, some of them ancient like Gnosticism that present themselves in new ways, victimism, which is a new ideology of evil. Sort of the heart of the Great Reset is at the heart of its victimism. So yeah, I deploy Catholic social teaching against the ideological enthusiasms of the Great Reset. And again, that's why I would say a better title would be The Mystical Body of Christ Against the Mystical Body of Antichrist. But I wanted non-Catholics to read it too. So
well, it's
catchier title.
It's beautiful, and I want to hit on this because I'd like to bring this part of our interview to a close. And we're going to have to do this again, if with your permission, because there's a lot of areas to go into. But so, from your opinion, and obviously this is not going to by any means doesn't do justice to what you wrote here. So everybody needs to pick this up to get involved in this. But what would you say? Maybe top 2 or 3 things why Christianity is the answer to the Great Reset.
Well, it's first of all, the Great Reset is a war of denial of Christianity, right? So I would say that's what we call the Great Reset is a fundamental attack of the Christian understanding of the human person.
Yes,
made in the image and likeness of God, has an inviolable dignity, beauty, and worth. And if you look at sort of all of these ideological enthusiasms, these modernist, postmodern ideological enthusiasms warring against the human person are grounded in Heidegger. So for Heidegger, Nietzsche wasn't enough. Like Nietzsche denies Christ, but Heidegger wanted to deny
oblivion in the human person.
Yeah, he wanted to obliterate truth, reality, being itself. Even erasing God isn't enough. Like it's an erasure of the numinous. So it's a violent war on truth, and that has real impact. It's just my friend, you called me earlier today. My friend said you need to meet with this priest, and because you sound angry. I was teasing our mutual friend Armin tongue in cheek that with my work in Gaza, I'm starting to hate people that look like me. He goes, "What do you mean?" I'm like, if I see someone that looks like me, conservative, Republican, that's what I am, middle-class white guy that wears his baseball cap with a bend from how we did it back in the 70s, I look at him and go, you are cheering along the ethnic cleansing of the Palestinians. You believe in Christian Zionism. You hold to an absurd heresy and advocate genocide. I said, I just look at middle-class white Republican guys that look just like me, and I'm prejudiced against them. Armin's like, you need to talk to Father. Come talk to Father. I go, Armin, I'm kidding. Kind of. Maybe not. But, that strange digression. But I was there meeting with Father, and I was expressing to him, I go, Father, I'm so upset that I'm working on an article right now called The War Against the Third Temple, or Destroying the Third Temple. What is the Third Temple? You hear these evangelicals, they talk about rebuilding the Third Temple, these satanic fantasies of rebuilding the temple in Jerusalem and sacrificing a red heifer, as if Jesus didn't answer all of the promises to Abraham. And if the atonement wasn't enough, that somebody somewhere needed a cow in Jerusalem. It's really satanic. Yes. And it's a satanic belief that was promulgated by atheists in England in the late 19th century to achieve political objectives. And that you hear Catholics regurgitating what they've heard on Protestant radio. And none of these beliefs are older than 100 years, right? But if you look at what's happening right now around the world, in India, and I've been writing a lot about this, there's a rise of Hindu nationalism. Modi is a monster, and he is fomenting, in one state alone in India, out of 340 churches, 280 churches have been burned down this year. Catholic churches.
Wow.
Yeah, there are Catholic communities in India that have been there since the 1st century. St. Thomas came and to the synagogue, to the Jews in India, they became the Catholics of India. They're still there. Their descendants are still there. You have the Christians in Gaza and in West Bank and Bethlehem itself, descended from the apostles' families. Palestinian Christians have they have been there since the first century, before the first century. They're being starved and targeted by the IDF. Yes. In Artsakh, in Armenia, the Armenian Christian community of Artsakh a year ago, this month, was completely ethnically cleansed by Azerbaijan, an Islamist country that was funded by Israel and armed by Israel to ethnically cleanse the first century, second century Christian community of Artsakh. And then Hungary, supposedly a great example of Christian Catholic integralism, worked to block arms transfers to Armenia so they could protect themselves. So we have a literal war on the Armenian Christians, on the apostolic Armenian communities, on the apostolic Indian communities, the Catholics of India, of the first century Christians, then of Gaza, of West Bank, and then of course in Sudan and Ethiopia, the church is suffering horribly. So we're seeing, really, if we are the third temple as the body of Christ, and these Christians who are being shot, who are being starved, these are the stones of the temple that are one by one. It's as if Satan himself is trying to remove and not leave one stone on top of another. And they're turning these living stones into corpses. And the church in the West, we were silent when the first century Christian community of Iraq was ethnically cleansed by ISIS. Do you know most of the ethnic cleansing that happened to the church in Iraq, a first century Christian church, again, thanks to St. Thomas, was being ethnically cleansed? It happened under the occupation when U.S. troops were there, most of it. Then ISIS came along to finish it off. Paul tells us in his epistles, when he tells us to pray, most of the time, over 70% of the time, when he says to pray, he follows it up with for the persecuted church. If I were hanging out with Paul, I'd have said, Paul, who are you talking about? Who are you talking to? We're all persecuted. You know what I mean? Like Paul, I don't know who's not. There's no church in an affluent suburb of Chicago yet. You know, I don't know who you're talking to. There's not Pastor Hagee's big mega church in San Antonio. I want you to tell me, Paul, who isn't being persecuted? And Paul was probably like, well, you know, those who are being persecuted worse than us at this very moment. Those are being stoned right now. That's what we're praying for.
Yeah.
Because the whole church was persecuted. And here we feel sorry for ourselves because things aren't great. The Department of Justice has been weaponized against us and against pro-life activists. And, you know, the woke mobs will attack you for saying Christ is king. But really, we have to acknowledge that we are the safest, freest, most prosperous Christians who have ever walked the face of the earth. We should stop worrying so much about, and not that we shouldn't fight for the right to say Merry Christmas at our workplace in the United States, of course. And it is very serious that your employer would force you to take a vaccine that has human embryonic kidney involved in the creation of that medical technology. This is all very important stuff. But it should not blind us to the reality that in Nigeria right now, there are Christians that will be killed this week. In India, there are Christians that will be terrorized and killed. In Gaza, there are Catholics that are starving to death. Catholics that literally descend from James's family, and James was a part of Jesus's family. So this is who we're talking about, and it is quite a privilege. In Fulton Sheen's beautiful book, The Mystical Body of Christ. It's one of those, you know, in the 1920s, he had very profound, deep theological writing. He moved towards popular writing. And even his popular writing, obviously, is so deep. But The Mystical Body of Christ is sort of this transition where Fulton Sheen's writing, and it's just so beautiful. But in The Mystical Body of Christ, Fulton Sheen says that the solidarity of Christians around the world with persecuted Christians from the other part of the world is the foundation of solidarity in the world. So the solidarity of Catholics in the United States with Catholics in Ireland, or Catholics in Gaza, or Catholics in India, or Catholics in Jimmy Lai, who is a prominent Catholic man who's rotting away in a Chinese prison for what? Nothing. Can't even receive communion. If solidarity with the persecuted church in China is the foundation of solidarity in the world, this is what Fulton Sheen said in The Mystical Body of Christ. What happens when in our prayer of the faithful, I'll ask people listening, have you ever heard the persecuted church mentioned by name? Christians in Gaza, Christians in Mosul, Christians in India, Christians in China. 12 Catholic bishops right now have been disappeared in China, just vanished, arrested by the state and vanished. Bishops, 12 bishops, countless thousands of Catholic lay people.
Yes, yes.
If we're not remembering them, and if we're the foundation of solidarity in the world, then the world's doomed because there's no solidarity. And people want to commend me. It's hysterical, Steve. When I will get these emails because of my work at defending or rescuing or hiding Muslims, or we provide armed security for synagogues in African countries that face Islamist attacks, and Catholic churches. We, through our Vulnerable Parish program, VPP provides armed guards and security cameras for vulnerable parishes that suffer extremist attacks. People will commend me when I'm advocating for Yazidi or for Muslims or for Jews, but then they want to criticize me. Why are you defending Catholics? Well, first of all, we're a Catholic apostolate, so we defend all people. And Catholics
universal.
fall all people. But how strange would it be that if I ran around the world advocating for every people group on the earth, but then I was silent when Israel was killing Catholic women with using snipers, which they did in December 16th of 2023. A sniper shot and killed 2 Catholic women in Gaza going to mass. Why would I be silent on that? How could I be silent on that? And if I was silent on that, you should trust nothing else I ever say.
Wow. And there's so much to unpack here, and unfortunately, we are close to out of time on this segment here. And my commentary, Jason, to this is there's a line from Pope Benedict, formerly Cardinal Ratzinger, one of my favorites. I need to get a t-shirt made on this. And it said, Christianity is a conspiracy to promote the good, right? And any of these kinetic wars, which are happening right now, the world is on fire, right? In many, many cases. And that was obviously one of the movies that you were involved with, I think in 2017, right? And any of the kinetic wars stem back from the ideologies, stem back from the thought process and what people are believing here. And I think the way forward on all this is that we must not forget. I'm an Eastern Catholic, and one of the parts that is, especially of those who, when we honor the dead, those who have passed, is a hymn is sung of eternal memory. God, do not forget them. We are made in the image of God. We must not forget, and most importantly, like, because we say like, it's very convenient. I think this is one of the things that you said. I think the talk at the retreat you gave recently was it's easy to talk a game like when if the Nazis were coming in, yeah, I definitely would have stood up to them. Well, in a certain sense, maybe quite literally, the Nazis are rising again in many areas of the globe, right? The ideology that one group of human beings doesn't have a right to exist. And what we want to say, especially coming from the heart of Catholicism, no, because Christ came to die for all of us, came to redeem all of us. It doesn't matter the color of your skin or the language you speak, or even if you don't believe the same thing that I believe, you still have a value to exist, and I have a duty to love you, even if you don't love me, right? This is redeemed vision here, and this is the vision that you are imparting over to the world. So I would say, as I remember, last point here to sum this part up is it's been said here. I remember writing maybe it was DC, maybe it was New York City, seeing on the subways where it said, if you see something, say something. And I would add to that piece now, if you see something, say something about these things, but then do something, right? This is the answer here. So I would propose to all of you, and I'd like you to also offer a challenge to anyone after this who's hearing this, but like, what is Christ calling you to do to get involved here? There are many battles, speaking especially to gentlemen, there are battles in which you are being called to fight. How is he calling you into the battle? Do that. Jason, last word on this. What would you say is one thing that we can do to get involved, especially in the work that you're doing?
Yeah, I would say the one thing is right now, the great scandal, the great shame to the church in the West is our silence at the complete and total ethnic cleansing of the Catholic community from Gaza. Absolutely atrocious. What makes it worse is I will see conservative commentators, people, I won't say their names on your show, but I say their names on my show, that tweet things like flatten Gaza or say that God is punishing Israel for not killing all the Canaanites or something, as if, what are you talking about? You're talking about the descendants, and this goes for the Muslims too. The Palestinians descend from the first century Christians. There were invasions and there was Islamization, yes, but there is the oldest Christian community in the world. Over 17,000 children murdered, and the church in the West is silent. And what makes this so tragic is that our Protestant brothers and sisters, with their pumpkin spice lattes and their cute little bookstores, promulgate and advocate genocide through this heresy of Christian Zionism. And Christian Zionism, as Catholics, obviously, we cannot hold to it. But to me, it's not even a heresy, it's an apostasy. Because if you deny that Jesus is not the fulfillment of every promise, then I think at that point, you've apostatized. If you deny that Jesus is the third temple, you have apostatized. So, but beyond that, we just need to get over our pride. I wrote an article called "Help, I'm an Anti-Palestinian Bigot." And what I said in this article was, people have asked me, are you worried about being called anti-Semitic because of your advocacy for the Christians in Gaza? And I said, I don't care, but I don't think anyone would ever call me an anti-Semite. But let me do an examination of my conscience and see if I have some anti-Semitism lurking in my soul. And so I was thinking about it. And then it struck me, no, I'm not an anti-Semite, but I do hold to anti-Arab prejudice. I really do. And I thought, okay, and I wrote all about it. I said, but should this prejudice blind me to a civilian population being absolutely brutalized, to seeing the oldest Christian community in the world ethnically cleansed, and how thoroughly our bigotry is? I had a prominent Catholic journalist say to me that the Christians of Gaza aren't really Christians because they've been Arabized and they're more Arab than Christian.
Wow.
And I said, well, maybe you're not really Christian. You've just been Europeanized. But, there were Arabs in the upper room. So there was Arab culture from the birth of, the church. Absolutely unbelievable. But it is our prejudice that has blinded us to the oldest Christian. I think it was prejudice that blinded us to the Iraqi Christian community's plight. Like, how was the church in the West silent as ISIS?
500,000.
Say this again.
Wasn't it 500? The last I heard was 500,000 Iraqis were murdered in the Gulf War.
Yeah, 500,000. 2 million have died. 2 million Arabs have died in the 40 years since the first Gulf War. Civilians. So, and the oldest Christian communities in the world have suffered the most in Iraq and Syria. I can't wait as someone who gets to go to these countries. I pray for the time where we can do pilgrimages to Iraq, because Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Gaza, the West Bank, Israel. This is the Holy Land. For Catholics, the first century church, the church is as old in Iraq and Syria as it is in Gaza and Jerusalem. From the very first days, there have been Christian churches there, Christian communities there. And we need to raise our voice and stand in solidarity with our Christian brothers and sisters who are suffering. And I can tell you, it breaks their heart to see that the church in the West isn't often just silent, but cheerleading their ethnic cleansing.
So this is my challenge to all of you who are hearing this, right? Share this interview. Share this interview with 3 people, because this message needs to get out, something that's not being reported by the mainstream media. Share this on your social media. And most importantly, ask God how you can get a little uncomfortable. How can you get a little bit uncomfortable, right? Because the old phrase goes, Jesus came to afflict the comfortable and comfort the afflicted, right? So how can we get a little bit afflicted in our life, right? Prick our conscience so that we can go and comfort and support the vulnerable. Jason Jones, thank you for the time that you've given here. What is the best way for us to get in touch with you to support the work you're doing?
You can follow us. Our website's vulnerablepeopleproject.com. We're also on Instagram and Twitter. If you follow us on Instagram, you'll get inundated with information on vulnerable Christian communities and vulnerable communities generally around the world. And my podcast, The Jason Jones Show.
Awesome. Jason, thank you so much. I have one more question. If we can't do it, I'm cool with that because your time is valuable. Can we do something a little more? Everything we've talked about is pretty heavy, right? Can we do something a little light and fluffy?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so I want to introduce to you, and this is what we do with all of our guests who come on the Redeemed Vision podcast. We call this the 12. Okay, these are those who are fans of the show, pretty familiar with these questions, but they're always different answers. Don't think too much of it. Top of your head, and it helps us to get to know you a little bit more. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right, number one, peanut butter, creamy or crunchy?
Creamy.
2, if you could be any Star Wars character, who would you be?
Boba Fett.
I thought so. That was my bet. 3, what is your desert island food?
Watermelon.
That's brilliant. I'll take that one. 4, beer or wine?
Oh, man.
I know. You're welcome.
This is the tough one.
Mm-hmm.
I can only have one for the rest of my life?
Yeah, well, you can. If we're gonna eat right now, what would you? And you got your choice:
right
beer
now,
or wine.
Beer. Right now.
Okay,
beer.
so what kind?
Oh wow. Right now?
Yeah.
Oh, are you buying?
Sure. Yes. I'm buying.
Wes Leverin.
All right. Well, I have never had that. I need now. I have to go get a second job apparently, so I'm in. 5th. Number 5, what is your most memorable Christmas gift you received growing up?
Like a big mountain with like 1,000 green army men. It was like a mountain for these army men to defend. I was very happy.
I can believe that. How old were you?
Maybe 6 or 7. It was as tall as me. The mountain was as tall as me.
That is awesome. That is awesome. Number 6, and this is going to be unique since the man that you are, but I'm going to ask it anyway. What is your bucket list country or city?
Oh, so that has to be somewhere I've never gone.
Sure. Yes.
Iceland.
Iceland. Oh, yeah. Instead of moving to New Braunfels.
I'd like to do the Writer's Walk in Iceland.
What is that?
It's just this trail where like Hemingway and Mark Twain and just everyone would go do this like hike.
I'm intrigued. After the Via de Compostela, right? I think I may have to take you up on that. Okay. Number 7, if you could have one superpower, what would it be?
Fly.
Welcome to the most popular answer given here. Number 8,
no
you're
TSA.
in the media.
No TSA.
not with a TSA. Excellent. Number 8, since you're in the movie business, have you watched The Chosen?
I have.
So, impossible question. What's your favorite episode?
Well, I only watched one season. Don't judge me. I actually one episode. I was invited to the red carpet premiere in DC at the Museum of the Bible of the Christian Special.
Okay.
I watched it. I loved it. But that's the only one I've ever watched.
What was the episode?
It was the Christian Special from 2 years ago. I forget.
Oh, the Christmas special.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, really good. So Jason, as one purveyor or viewer of good quality films and media, I would highly recommend go deeper.
I've asked myself, at first I didn't watch it because I thought I was cheesy. It was going to be cheesy. And then I didn't watch it, I think, because I'm jealous and envious that it was beautiful. So I have to pole vault over my envy that
Well, kill the pride, brother. Kill the pride and enter in. Okay, and I'll drive in and watch it with you if that's what it takes here.
Okay.
Number 9, if you could get everyone to see the world as you do, what would that world look like?
Oh, that's easy. I think the only gift God has given me, like I'm not very talented, I'm not good looking, I'm not smart, but the one thing is I really do, I'm mesmerized by human beings. Just since I was a kid, I would go and I would ditch school and sit on the street corner, and I would just watch there was a little hot dog stand, and I would get a hot dog and it had sesame seeds. I love that. And I would watch people. I would go for when they got off the train, and I would just be in awe of these people. Even I almost get into ecstatic states when I'm in airports. And C.S. Lewis wrote that God must have given us a filter so that when we look at human beings, we don't fall to our knees. And yeah, I don't think I have that filter. And that's the one thing I wish people had. Someone said to me yesterday, a Jewish friend of mine who's very committed Zionist, he said, Jason, if I didn't know just how much you love people and how much civilian casualties bother you, I would be angry at you for your outspoken criticism of Israel. But I just know you love human beings so much, and the collateral damage of this war is just driving you insane and breaking your heart. He's right. So I wish that everyone could see human beings the way I see them.
Thank you for articulating redeemed vision very well. 10. Yeah, there you go, buddy. And this is that's why I saw you. I'm like, you've got to get on this podcast. We have to talk. And I want to become very good friends with Mr. Jason Jones. This is an honor. So thank you for the articulation on that. So I'm probably going to snip that and use that in a very particular way. So it's beautifully said. 10. Besides your name and date, what do you want written on your tombstone?
There's one thing that you cannot take with me as I enter this grave. My panache. Cyrano. Cyrano de Bergerac's last words. You can put Cyrano's last words. My panache.
I love it. I love it. He may not be pretty, folks, but he's got panache. 11. If you had to pick only one favorite saint, who would it be?
Oh,
man. I know, you're welcome.
Saint Athanasius.
Why?
I mean, he stood up to everyone. Everyone. The world's gone Aryan. I'm going to stand up. His fellow bishops, the political authority, he stood up to everyone. You know, St. Maximilian Kolbe, others I admire, but they weren't alone. But St. Athanasius was just alone.
What a gift. What a gift. Well said. Number 12. Jason, why be Catholic?
Oh. Well, I think be Catholic because that's what we were made for. It's just
beautifully said.
It's why we were created. And that's when I first started reading. When I got to the New Testament, I said to a Baptist friend of mine, I said, even if it's not true, it's more beautiful than any other truth people could come up with. And he said, well, maybe if the key opens the door, it's the key. He's like, and I said, oh yeah, that makes sense. You know, if the key works, it's probably the right key. So if it rings true, even as uncanny and strange as it is, but it rings perfectly true, and it opens the lock on your heart, it's probably because it's the right key, and it's the church. And I think of what Chesterton said, the church is the only thing bigger that looks bigger from the inside than from the outside. And I remember as soon as I was baptized and confirmed and received my first communion, like at that minute, I thought of what Chesterton said, and I was like, wow, that's true.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Jason Jones, you're a gift. It's an honor to have you on the Redeemed Vision podcast. I definitely want to have you on with your permission, because I think there's some areas that we can go much deeper on this. So thank you for your time here. Just hold the line. We will, I'd like to just sum up our conversation. So thank you, Jason, for being here.
Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Absolutely. And for all of you, we hope that this has been an enlightening conversation here. Yes, the world's on fire, but there's much that you can do. So see the world, say something, and do something. Do the divine will. Do what God's calling you to be. And remember, nothing is wasted. Everything's redeemable. So may everything we do give glory to the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. As it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen. Until next time, I'm Steve Pokorny. This is the Redeemed Vision podcast.
The Redeemed Vision podcast is an outreach of Freedom Coaching. To learn more, check out freedom-coaching.net and follow us on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and MeWe.